philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Think Grow podcast. This is your host, Ruben Chavez, and I'm glad to be back with you. I'm just going to get right into it today. I want to start by summarizing the last episode that I did, which was me kind of talking out loud, or thinking out loud rather, about what contributes to dysfunction on the individual and the collective level, negative emotions and destructive thoughts and patterns of behavior that basically detract from our long-term well-being. And then on the flip side, I was trying to figure out what contributes to our flourishing and our long-term well-being. And I kind of came to the conclusion in that episode, or the tentative conclusion. I formed a hypothesis that it was values, that it was basically human well-being comes down to valuing the right things, and that we need to understand what those things are and pursue those things. And that's in the right direction, I think. But I've been doing a lot more thinking about this, and a lot more writing, and a lot more researching and reading and studying about this idea. And I think there's a better way to frame it. And it's a more concrete way to explain these dimensions of human experience, which is kind of a phrase I used in the last episode also, which is a little bit vague. But really what they are needs, right? These are human needs. And if we are able to identify the things that we need for our long-term well-being, and then satisfy or fulfill those needs in adaptive ways, in sustainable ways, that, I think, is the crux of well-being. Of course, a lot depends on this. There's a lot of moving parts to this, because first, one of the questions that comes up is, well, what do we need? And how can we know what's adaptive and what's non-adaptive, meaning what's sustainable and what's just, let's say, selfish desire? Anyway, these are some of the questions that came up for me after I recorded the last episode, and I have some tentative answers that I wanted to put forth and see what you thought, because I think this is kind of a big step in my writing process for the book and in my thinking process. I'm kind of organizing a lot of information into this framework here that I'm going to talk to you about and hopefully explain. Okay, so we have to kind of define our goal. What is it that we're talking about exactly? And what are we trying to achieve? Well, we're trying to achieve long-term well-being. That's what everybody is really after, I think. This is the ultimate good that Aristotle reasoned his way to, and basically argued that everything we do is for the sake of long-term well-being. He used the term eudaimonia, and that's translated as happiness, but that's not an accurate translation. Or rather, the ancient Greeks did not use happiness in the way that we use it today. Happiness is not subjective. So what they meant was much more like long-term well-being. And that was a much more comprehensive picture of human flourishing than mere subjective pleasure or positive emotions. In fact, the idea of well-being, as I use it, and as Aristotle used eudaimonia, encompassed suffering. It made room for the fact of unpleasant experiences in life, because the Greeks and other ancient philosophers realized that, in fact, many of the things in life that we value and that contribute to long-term well-being involve a degree of unpleasantness. I've used the example of having kids in a couple previous episodes, and that example, I think, still stands. That's a really useful way to understand that dynamic. Like, you can do things and you can engage in behavior that is not immediately pleasurable, but that has a long-term payoff that actually contributes to your well-being in a deep and meaningful way. That is the goal. That's what everyone is after. is long-term, big picture well-being. So I'll just use the term well-being from now on. Now, in light of that goal, how should we act? How should we construct our lives, and what should we pursue? I actually think that is the question, that's the fundamental question at the bottom of every philosophy or psychology about the human condition and about kind of living a good life. I think it comes down to that one question is, what should we pursue and what should we value? Those are very similar questions. And we have had a long, long intellectual history dating back almost 3,000 years of philosophical inquiry into that question. And different schools of thought have provided different answers to that question. And so one of the things I've noticed in doing my research for the book and in constructing this framework that I'm going to explain to you here is that the answers that have been offered by the various schools of thought, the various philosophies, the various psychologies about what kind of life we should live and about what's worth pursuing in life, those answers tended to fall into categories. They could be placed into categories. And the categories kind of were based around an ultimate value or a predominant value that that particular school of thought held sacred. For instance, Taoism is actually a very comprehensive philosophy, and it is inherently about balance. But one of the emphases that Taoism has is on fluidity and spontaneity and living in accordance with nature and living in accordance with the essence of who you are. And so this is actually a little bit like Nietzsche's philosophy of creating your own values and kind of radical authenticity. I'm obviously oversimplifying both of these schools of thought and giving you a very low resolution rendering of them just for the sake of simplicity. But I found this to be true among various philosophies that you could kind of, they kind of mapped onto each other in certain ways. And so anyway, that kind of informed this framework. Another thing that informed it is I came across the work of a sociologist, I believe, whose name is Shalom Schwartz. And he wrote really a classic paper back in, I think, 92, maybe one in 92 and one in 94, about a theory of basic human values, a theory of universal basic human values. And he basically outlined 10 values that are held in all cultures universally. And that was a really eye-opening discovery that I made. That research was really eye-opening for me because it converged with a lot of the things that I've been learning about and that I told you about in the last episode about moral psychology and about positive psychology, and it converged with other philosophical frameworks too. And so I realized that values are actually based on needs, because if we need something, then we value it, of course. And that's a useful thing to know, because if you're talking about universal values that have persisted throughout recorded history, and likely longer than that, much longer than that, you're talking about things that humans have needed for a very long time. And so then I thought about what is it that humans actually need? What do we actually need for well-being and to flourish? Well, I think our needs come in two basic categories. We have needs that have to do with change and novelty and growth. And then we have needs that have to do with stability and certainty and security. I call these just basically growth needs and stability needs. We can think of them like that. And I don't think this is arbitrary. I don't think this is an arbitrary distinction. I think it comes from a very real problem that we've had to solve for a very long time, which is, should I approach this new thing or should I withdraw from this new thing and kind of just go back into my cave or stay where I am? And this is sometimes referred to as the approach withdrawal system in the brain. So it's a basic decision that we have to make and that we've had to make for a very long time. It's hard for us to conceive of the ancestral environment because we live in such relative comfort today, at least most of us do. But in the ancestral environment, things were so uncertain and everything was a potential danger for us, but we still needed to explore. So there was that constant paradox of going out and exploring and getting new information, gathering new food, combined with needing to maintain stability and a sense of security. So these two needs are always in tension with each other. I also wanted to make one other quick disclaimer is that I realize that I am not the first person to talk about or think about human needs. I was also taking into account Maslow's hierarchy of needs when I was constructing this model. So that work also informed much of what I have been thinking about and much of what I'm presenting here. So we have growth needs and we have stability needs. And there's always a tension between the two. So too much change or growth can be destabilizing, but also too much certainty or stability can become suffocating. So we're always trying to toe the line. If we never go out and venture and explore new territory, we'll die because we'll become too rigid and we won't have the resources we need to continually update our existence, essentially. And by the same token, if we explore too much and if we're too curious, we could just destabilize our entire group. We could destabilize our psyches. We could run into chaos, basically. We could actually confront physical chaos that we actually are not prepared to deal with in the form of a saber-toothed tiger or an unforeseen obstacle of some sort, right? So this is the eternal question of how much do we change versus how much do we stay the same? We need independence and autonomy in order to grow and express ourselves, but we also need relationships and community for stability and accountability. We need adventure and we need novelty so we can challenge ourselves. But on the other hand, we also need accomplishment and a sense of mastery so that we feel competent. Another example would be we need pleasure and enjoyment out of life, but we also need responsibility and meaning. We need flexibility and spontaneity, but we also are creatures of habit. So we need structure and rituals. We need rules, but we also need to be able to break them. And this is the thing that we're constantly navigating. In your own life, you have habits and you have things that you need to do on a daily basis. You have a particular structure to your day. But if that structure becomes too rigid and if it becomes too suffocating, then you don't grow and you don't actually evolve as a person. And so that structure needs to be continually updated. You need to rethink your day. You need to rethink your habits. Are you working on the right things? Are you falling into ruts? And so that's maybe a more practical way of looking at it. Hey there, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about one of our sponsors for this show, Skillshare. I love learning new skills and keeping my mind sharp. Skillshare is by far one of my favorite ways to do this. It's an online learning community with thousands of different classes for creative and curious people. You can take classes on writing, photography, cooking, productivity, social media marketing, and much more. As many of you know, I've been working on a book. A while back, I took a couple writing classes on Skillshare, one by essayist Roxane Gay and another by Simon Van Buie, who's an author. And I was just blown away by the depth and clarity and practicality of these classes. Both really helped me to hone my skills and improve my craft. Skillshare is all video-based and it's all self-paced, which I love. And most classes are under an hour with short lessons to fit any schedule. I'm talking like 10 minutes per lesson in most cases, which is a very digestible way to break up any new subject. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. And if you visit that link, you'll get a free trial of their premium membership. That's Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. I want to walk you through these 6 categories of needs that I identified and that I wrote down and give you kind of a feel for each one and how they operate in tension with each other. And again, these are informed by the research of many different fields and many different academics. And so I'm not a researcher, at least not in the professional, official sense, and I'm not an academic. I'm just a guy who's trying to make sense of the world. But I think that these needs that I'm about to tell you are grounded in very solid research and in very real dimensions of the human experience. So I'm going to walk you through these 6 needs, and for each need, I'm going to kind of give you not so much a definition, but a mosaic of terms and words and phrases that kind of point to that particular dimension of need. Because these are still dimensions of needs. They're categories of needs. They're not so specific. They encompass, I think, a wide array of needs, but they each have a personality. They have a particular personality. So let me walk you through so it makes sense. The first need is autonomy. We need autonomy. We need independence. This has to do with also freedom and rights and our desire for self-expression and choice. Autonomy also relates to the development of the ego, of the self as an individual. It's, the mantra is, I answer to myself. It's the searching for one's place in the world. It's single life. It's solo work. It's the attitude that I'll do it myself. It's separation. It's boundaries. The archetype that I think would represent this need is something like the explorer or even the warrior. It's the courageous and lone individual. Now, this is kind of in tension with another need of ours, which is relationships. And under the category of relationships, we have things like social bonds. We have accountability and responsibility. It's guidance from others. It's restraint. It's the development of the conscience, or in Freudian terms, the superego. It's the thing we answer to that's not just ourselves. It's I answer to others. It's married life. It's belonging to someone else, a group. It's the attitude, let's do this together. You find this need, this ethos in military and in church groups. It's closeness, it's intimacy, it's dependency, the healthy form of dependency. And I think the archetype that would typify this need is the lover. Okay, so far we've covered 2 needs: autonomy and relationships. We need autonomy, but we also need relationships. Here's the second set of needs. We need novelty. Novelty/change. So what does this need consist of? It's exposure to new challenges and exposure to adversity. It's trying new ideas and challenging convention. It's exploration, it's experimentation, spontaneity, breaking the rules and being creative and being curious. It's seeking new goals. It's putting yourself out there and exposing yourself to failure. It's being a student. Novelty and change, this need is also about stimulation and engaging yourself. It's about exertion. It's exercise, breaking down the muscles. It's thinking, it's exploratory thought. It's startups. Startups is a good way to think about this, because the ethos in startups is like, let's disrupt the industry. And that's novelty and change at work. We need that. We need flexibility and fluidity. I think a good archetype for this need is the magician or the rebel or even the creator. It's exploring the new and shaking things up and challenging the status quo. Now, juxtaposed with this need is mastery. We also need mastery. And that operates in tension with novelty. What's mastery? Mastery is the attainment of skills. It's the sense of competence. It's the attainment of resources like money and security and also rest. If exercise is encompassed in novelty and change, then the mastery is the attainment of the resources that help you recover from that exercise. Mastery is mastering the fundamentals. It's using the wisdom of the past. It's commitment to one's ideals, one's values, one's goals. It's habits. It's discipline. It's following the rules and mastering the rules. It's accomplishing goals and risk management. It's being an authority. It's being a teacher. Mastery is aligned with meditating rather than thinking. It's aligned with Fortune 500 companies rather than startups because Fortune 500 companies are established. They're not as nimble. They're not as sensitive to change and to environmental factors. They're more established. It's Confucianism. Confucianism is the philosophy in the East that is kind of opposed to Taoism. It's more based on tradition and on authority and on conformity to the rules. Mastery is the known, whereas novelty is the unknown. Mastery is control. It's power in the good sense, in the respectable sense. It's solutions. It's certainty. It's order. I think a good archetype for mastery is the wise king. It's the individual who brings order to the kingdom, but also to your own mind and to your own life. Okay, so now we have 4 needs. We have autonomy and relationships. Those operate in tension with each other. We need both. And then we have novelty and mastery. Again, those operate in tension with each other, but we need both. Okay, so let's go through the last set of needs here. The 5th need we have, I think, is pleasure. And pleasure is made up of positive emotions. It's desire and seeking positive experiences and positive emotions and enjoyment. It's happiness. It's the minimization of pain. One kind of amusing way to think about it is if you're a fan of the show Parks and Recreation, it's treat yourself. That's a good slogan for pleasure. And I think an archetype that would represent this need dimension is the fool or the jester who is all about having a good time and lightheartedness and jokes. I think if I had to pick a philosophy that would represent this dimension of needs, it would be utilitarianism, because utilitarianism is based on the idea that the morality of a behavior is good insofar as it benefits the greatest number of people. It's located in the outcome. The morality of the behavior is located in the outcome of it, not necessarily the behavior itself. And so I think that that's a reasonable way to conceptualize this need for pleasure. It's the minimization of pain. Now, this is, again, a vital need that we have. But we have a need that kind of contrasts with it. And I don't know if this need is named properly, but I'll give you an idea for what it is. I'm calling it meaning. I think this need is meaning. And what's contained in meaning, what meaning has to do with is gratitude and embracing what is, embracing whatever happens. It's inner peace rather than fleeting happiness. It's accepting the unpleasantness that is inherent in life, but not in a way that's sad, in a way that is life affirming. It's accept yourself rather than treat yourself. It's getting the inside right rather than trying to get the outside right. It's maturity rather than innocence. It's the integration of the shadow. Meaning is more present oriented rather than outcome oriented. It's process based. It's mindfulness. Meaning is it's grounding your life in a stable value structure and pursuing those values and living by those standards. It's purpose. Meaning is eating your vegetables. It's doing the things that you know you need to do. If you think of pleasure and meaning as individuals that you're trying to describe, you could think of pleasure as hot, but meaning as beautiful. It's timeless and it's lasting. It's not fleeting. The archetype for meaning is the sage. And I think the philosophy that you can map onto meaning is virtue ethics. That's Aristotle's contribution to philosophy is virtue ethics, which is the cultivation of the different virtues that lead to human excellence, essentially. So there you have it. Those are the 6 basic needs that I think we all share. I think they're universal, and I also believe that they are products of evolution. And I think there's actually good evidence to back that up. But that's not the scope of this episode. I just wanted to share with you this kind of framework and this model so that we can start talking about it in more depth. Once again, I'm just going to go through those needs again for you so you have them, so they stick in your mind. It's autonomy and relationships, novelty and mastery, and pleasure and meaning. What I'd like to do in the near future in one of these episodes is go through each of these needs and present ways that we can actually fulfill, like practical ways, concrete ways that we can actually go about fulfilling these needs in productive and adaptive ways. And I think that's a really useful thing to do. I've started to do it in my own life, and I have to say that I've found immense value in it. And I really think that this is kind of a very pragmatic and also effective way to look at the different dimensions of our lives that we need to pay attention to. So that's what I'll do in a future episode. Thank you for listening to this whole episode. If you're still listening, you are a gem, and I love you. And I want to know what you think about what I've laid out here. These ideas are still somewhat in the developmental stage, but I wanted to share them with you. I hope you found value in them. And that's about it. So I'll see you later. I never know how to end these things. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.